I'll never forget that night. The pizzeria where I worked was just about to close and I was cleaning up, ready to head home, when the phone rang. I was alone behind the counter, so I answered it. At first there was nothing, just a hollow silence, so I hung up. A minute later it rang again. I picked up, ready to tell whoever it was to call back in the morning, but this time there was a voice, fragile, breathy, like someone speaking through thin wool. An old woman asked for a plain pizza to be delivered. On the surface I stayed professional, but inside I was desperate to finish my shift and go home. I called out to my manager that there was one more delivery, and he told me to take it. I was annoyed at first, tired and cold, but then I thought about the tip. Old people usually left good tips, so I agreed and took down the address. She hung up without another word. I told the cook to start a regular pie and grabbed my jacket. My manager told me to head straight home after the drop, the shop would be shut tight. It was just before 10. I punched the address into my GPS. The route led me out into the quieter side of town, the streets getting emptier the farther I drove. The house turned out to be a small, single-story place on a block that felt like it had been frozen in time, no cars on the drive, no porch lights, no movement. I parked, grabbed the pizza, and walked up to the door. The whole area felt swallowed by the night. I rang the bell. Nothing. No footstep, no shuffle behind curtains. I rang again. The silence widened. I was about to write the order off as a bogus address when I glanced up and saw a figure at the window. Someone was standing there, backlit just enough to give them a shape, tall, still, watching. For a second I thought it was the old woman, but the posture felt wrong, as if whatever it was had been waiting for me to arrive. My heart did that weird jitter, the one that makes your mouth go dry and your hands colder than the air. I told myself to stay calm, to keep it simple, knock, hand over the pizza, take the cash, go home. I stepped closer, and as I drew near the glass, the person at the window didn't move, didn't flinch. The porch light, or what little light there was, caught the outline of a head turned slightly, as if whoever stood there was studying me with interest. Something about the stillness sent a prickle down my spine. It wasn't the normal kind of still, it felt intentional, like silence held in reserve. I knocked once, then waited. No answer. My knock felt loud in that hush, ridiculous and out of place. I called out, "Pizza for," but my voice sounded flat, swallowed by the dark. When the figure finally shifted, it wasn't to open the door. It stepped away from the window and disappeared into the house, leaving the glass clear except for the pale smear of breath that fogged for a second and then vanished. I stood there a beat longer, unsure whether to follow or retreat. I hadn't come this far to leave empty-handed, but every instinct screamed that I shouldn't go inside. I decided to call the number that had placed the order, but there was no answer. I tried the house line again, and then the manager's voice in the back of my head telling me to get home. In that moment I realized how alone the street felt. Even the usual distant hum of traffic had gone quiet, as if the night itself was holding its breath. I thought about going back to my car, locking the doors, and calling it in. Part of me wanted to run. But another part, the part that preferred closure over questions, wanted to know who had been at that window and why no one had come to the door. So I took another step toward the porch. My hand hovered over the knob. The wood was cold under my palm. I was about to knock again when the back of my neck prickled the way it does when someone is watching you who shouldn't be there. I turned slowly, and there was nothing but the empty street, a mailbox, the soft rustle of leaves. No figure at the window. No flicker of movement in the curtains. Nothing. I don't know why I stayed as long as I did. Maybe it was stubbornness, or the promise of a couple of bucks and a good tip, or maybe I was trying to prove to myself I wasn't afraid. Whatever the reason, I left the pizza on the porch, set the receipt on top, stepped back to the car, and started to drive away. As I pulled off, I glanced in the rearview. The porch was empty, the house a dark silhouette against the streetlight. No one came to the door. No head appeared at the window. Later, when I called the shop to say the delivery was complete, my manager sounded relieved and said thanks. It wasn't until the next morning, when another driver told a different story, that it hit me. The old woman at that house hadn't ordered pizza that night. Neighbors said the house had been vacant for months. That's when the small image of the figure at the window latched itself to my mind and wouldn't let go. I still get a tight feeling in my chest when I think about how quiet that block was, about the way the figure watched and vanished, and about the small, ordinary choices that can lead you into the kind of silence you never fully escape. I froze and stepped back at first, but something made me edge closer to the window. Through the glass I could make out an old woman, late 70s, maybe, standing perfectly still, her face blank. I called out that I had her pizza, my voice thin in the quiet. She didn't respond. I raised my voice and shouted again. Then, slowly, a smile spread across her face. Not a warm, friendly smile, a thin, unnatural grin that crawled up like it didn't belong to her. That image of her face through the glass is burned into my head. Shaken, I retreated to my car and dropped the pizza on the passenger seat. My fingers flew as I texted my manager, fingers trembling. I started the engine, ready to get as far away as possible. As I glanced to my right for one last look, my blood ran cold. The woman was right beside the passenger window, standing with that same empty stare. I pulled away without hesitation and drove down the street without once turning around. This happened 4 years ago when I was still in high school. I'd been sent out for the final delivery of my shift. My car was an old 1999 Camry, beat up but reliable, and I punched the address into my GPS. Living out in the country meant long drives for deliveries, and the sun was already going down. I'd guess it was about 7. After roughly 15 minutes on rutted dirt roads through thick trees, the GPS told me I'd arrived. The house sat alone, a small wooden cottage, almost a lakeside shack, surrounded by nothing but forest. The yard was wild, grass up to knee height. I'd seen rundown places before, so I didn't think much of it. I carried the pizza up and knocked. There was no answering light, no sound, but within 10 seconds I heard footsteps inside, slow, heavy thuds across wooden floors, coming toward the door and stopping right behind it. Unease crept over me. It felt like unseen eyes were tracking my every move. That's when I noticed a peephole set into the door, and then a voice from the other side said, flat and quiet, "It's the pizza guy." I called out, and a rough, raspy voice answered from the other side of the door, telling me to bring the pizza around back. My gut told me not to. Something about the way it sounded made the hair on my arms stand up, but I didn't want to get chewed out by my manager. The memory of the last time I pushed back and got attitude stayed with me, so I swallowed my unease and agreed. The yard was overgrown, the grass whipping against my calves as I pushed through it. Around the rear of the house there was a sagging little patio and an old shed. On the patio sat a round table and 4 chairs. One of the chairs had a head in it, turned away from me. At first I thought someone was dozing, but something about the stillness made me edge closer. "Excuse me," I said, stepping up slowly. The head didn't move. "Excuse me." I tried again, louder this time. Still nothing. The person in the chair didn't twitch an inch. Then a voice called from the corner of the house, "Over here." I spun around and saw a man peeking from the eaves, a grin stretched too wide across his face. His eyes were wild. "Come here," he said. "I want to show you something." That grin froze me. I felt the world narrow to the sound of my own heartbeat. Something primal in me snapped, maybe fear, maybe common sense, and I bolted. I ran the other way, around the house, back through the waist-high grass to my car, still clutching the pizza like it would anchor me to the ordinary. I didn't wait to lock it or check the rear view. I shoved the key in the ignition, started the engine, and drove off as fast as the little car would go. My hands trembled the entire time. A few miles down the road, I pulled over, breathless, and dialed the police. They asked me the usual questions and told me the officers would check it out. An hour later a patrol car called back to say there was no evidence anyone had been living at that house for a very long time, no footprints, no recent tire tracks, and the place had been vacant for months. I quit the delivery job a few days later. I don't know what would have happened if I'd gone closer to that man or if I turned my head to see who or what was sitting in that patio chair. Even now, years later, I find myself wondering what I might have seen if I had stayed. The image of that grin and the way the figure never moved are still with me, a small, relentless memory that makes me glad I ran. The road was the kind that swallows sound, trees pressing close on both sides, the kind of rural stretch you drive 100 times and never think much about. That night, though, the fog made everything feel thin and distant. I took the familiar shortcut toward town, the headlights cutting narrow tunnels through the mist, when something suddenly leapt out from the shoulder and into my path. I slammed the brakes so hard the car lurched. There was a thud, ugly and final, and my chest went cold. I pressed my palm to my forehead and swore under my breath. I had hit someone. My feet hit the ground before my head could catch up. The man lay crumpled by the front tire, hood pulled up over his head, black clothing soaked with whatever the road had to offer. He didn't move. For a moment I had no plan, just a flood of questions. Why here? Why now? Why did he throw himself into the road? Then I heard it, a distant, raw scream coming from the woods to my left. It pierced the fog and cut straight through the shock. Somebody needed help. I glanced back at the man at my tire. He still lay still, like a marionette whose strings had been cut. My brain argued logically that I shouldn't leave him. But the scream was sharp and human, and it felt like it might be the last sound that person ever made. Without thinking, I sprinted toward the tree line, boots crunching through wet leaves, the shout of my own footsteps swallowed by the dark. "Hello? Hey!" I yelled. My voice felt small. The forest answered with its usual chorus of rustles and insects, but nothing else. For a terrible second there was no sign of anyone, only the whisper of branches and my own ragged breathing. Then something moved, the sound of a foot flattening dead leaves a short distance away, slow, deliberate. I turned toward it and strained to see through the fog and the trees. Shapes shifted, silhouettes folding in and out of the mist. Even in that weak light I could make out a figure, stepping softly, almost gliding between trunks. My mouth went dry. The rational part of me wanted to shout, to demand the person's location, to call for help. Instead I stood there, frozen for a heartbeat too long, heart pounding like it would claw out of my ribs. The scream hadn't come again. Whatever had cried out was silent now, replaced by a sound that felt wrong in the chest, slow footfalls, breath that didn't sound quite human. Back by the car, the man in the hoodie remained where I'd left him, a dark shape in the glare of my hazard lights. I realized with a jolt how foolish I'd been. Leaving someone bleeding on the roadside to chase a noise in the dark was reckless. But at that moment the forest had pulled me like a magnet. The scream had been a command I couldn't ignore. As the fog closed around the trees, the footprint sound grew nearer, then paused, as if whatever moved in those woods was listening to me as I listened to it. And in that frozen space, with the damp night pressing against my skin, I finally understood that I hadn't simply driven into an accident. I had driven into something that was waiting. I could just make out a shadow crouched behind a tree across the road. Panic hit me and I sprinted back to my car, glancing over my shoulder the entire way to make sure I wasn't being trailed. When I reached the vehicle, the man I'd struck was gone. I didn't stop to puzzle over where he'd vanished to. I scrambled into the driver's seat and drove off, heart hammering the whole way. Somehow I still finished the delivery. I pulled up, rang the bell, and a middle-aged woman answered. After she paid, her eyes kept flicking past me to the car. Then she said something that froze me. "They let you bring delivery partners now?" Confused, I asked what she meant. She pointed without turning and said, "There's someone in your car." A cold dread squeezed my stomach as I turned to look. Someone was sitting in the back seat. I used the woman's phone to call the police. They arrived soon after, but when officers checked the interior, the person in my back was gone again, vanished as if swallowed. The part that still haunts me most is what they found, a bloodstained knife on the floor where that figure had been hiding. I replay that night in my head a lot. It's terrifying to imagine how different things could have gone if I hadn't kept driving and completed that delivery. The memory sits with me every day, a small, awful proof that at any moment the ordinary can flip into something dangerous, and that some nights leave shadows you can't shake.